It's nice to be here. It's nice to be in Sydney, and I'm happy to be able to talk to all of you. I was glad Anna talked about artists so that the work I'm going to show you doesn't seem out of context. I wanted to show you how I really came to think in a 360 spatialised way in order to then give you a sense of collisions and how it developed. So I wanted to talk about a few things, what inspires me as an artist, how I think through my work, and then how collisions really is an example of that. You'll probably know this painting, some of you. It's from 17,000 years ago, from the Laxal caves. It's interesting for me, this series of paintings, there's like 600 paintings in these caves of animals. The people who did these paintings were called the reindeer people. They hunted reindeer, they ate reindeer. There are reindeer bones found on the bottom of these caves. And there's not a single painting of a reindeer on the walls. What's painted is something else. An anticipation maybe of a relationship, a possibility of a meeting or an encounter. And in order to do this kind of work, in terms of difficulty with new technology, which at one point cave painting was, those artists had to go into a room with some form of light, maybe moss that was lit, and build a form of scaffold and paint in almost complete darkness. This is Bruegel's landscape with Icarus. Has influenced my work since I first saw it when I was 14. And not just the painting, but Auden's poem that goes with it. Landscape with Icarus. This painting of a whole world of things that are happening, but where the most important thing that's occurring are those white legs falling into the water. So the inspiration for me is, how do you get people to focus on the thing that's the most important within the cacophony that is our life? How do you draw attention to those tiny legs falling into the green water? And this, I need just to turn this because I don't want to keep looking and looking. This is Leonardo's Last Supper, also an innovation in its form. Leonardo took 3 years to cast the people he was painting in this. And he, like most artists, were working with the newest technology of his time. And new technology is unstable. It's buggy. Things happen with it. Leonardo wanted this painting to be more luminous than other paintings that he'd done previously. So he used an innovation on the form. The innovation in the Renaissance was oil painting. Leonardo used a different background to this painting, to this fresco, than he previously would have used. So he used a mixture of oil and fresco. And because of that, because it was new and therefore untried and therefore unknown, this painting had to be restored from the moment it was finished. And it's one of the most important paintings we have. So those things inform my thinking. This new technology, when you work with it, is tricky. I've had enormous stuff-ups. I've had almost tragedies. But you have to have a frame of mind that you're wrangling something that is evolving as you are working with it. And you have to be of the mindset for that to be okay. I started thinking about what is the viewer's relationship to the work many years ago. This piece, Coral, which Greg Ferris edited, was done in 2001. And I was thinking about physics, quantum mechanics, how the viewer changes the experiment. That is how when we are present with something, we change what the outcome is. I wanted to make a work which was incomplete without the viewer in it. And that was my thinking with these bowls which you held in your hands and captured the projections that were held in a lens-like bowl where you had to find the focal point in mid-air. In 2001, that was the form of participation that I was trying to create. The sense that you were implicit in the work, that the work without you was not finished. I made a couple of other works based on that thinking, and I ended up with a trilogy, and this piece, Evolution of Fearlessness, was the second part of that trilogy. I made it at a time when it was the John Howard era of immigration and the impact of what we might read in the media about boat people, one of those cycles that we continually return to in this country. And I wanted to create an experience where you could come face to face with someone, an interactive experience of being present with someone who was a stranger to you, that went beyond what you might imagine when you read a report in a newspaper about people arriving by boat from Afghanistan. So I made Evolution of Fearlessness. It's an interactive installation that was impacted by your touch. A physical space where the projection was life-size and where you had to walk up a couple of little steps, put your hand on a little glow of light, and you would see one of the life-size videos of the 11 women I filmed. One of them would step forward and just place her hand on your hand. So it's an encounter. It's just a simple moment of touch. Before you met any of those women, there was a book in the room and you could read something of their stories. Just 750 words about what had happened to them. But the words didn't tell you who was who, and there was nothing to identify each woman. This work is communal in its thinking. One woman's story can be represented by another woman's presence. So I'll just show you how that work operated. This is Diane, this is Rita. And outside I think is Shafika. Shafika, how are you? Good? You want me to show you the work? Finally? Here. This is Jenny.
Hi.
Shafika. These are the women in the work meeting for the first time.
A long time coming.
Okay, so you should come and have a look. I'll go and show Ayen and Lorna.
Ayen is a Dinka woman. Sudan was at war before she was born. Her earliest memory is of being dragged across the river to escape soldiers, and her cousin was screaming, so the uncle put a cloth into her cousin's mouth.
Though she was small, already knew how to stay silent in pain. When Ayan was older, soldiers came and attacked the school.
On one long bunk next to her mother and grandmother. Sometimes people urinated or defecated on them from the bunk above.
Without proper food, Eva didn't grow. Occasionally, they found field rats to eat.
It feels real.
Yes. Each of them strong in a different way. We all could fall into fear. I think we need to know there's a place beyond terror, which is this place of strength. And there's not many people who can show us. So in the end, I filmed 11 women who had lived beyond the state of fear. Women who fear had not crushed. And most of them are political refugees, and they've come from Afghanistan and Eritrea, Iraq, El Salvador. One was in Dachau, one's a child Holocaust survivor from Vienna. And what's incredible about them is their spirit. So beyond the terrible, terrible lives they've lived, is this sort of shining quality.
After seeing it, not only me, but other women who are part of this program, you know, the feeling of someone touching your hands, I think the most comfortable feeling that I've never had, that's the feeling I got today. Yes.
So I learned a huge amount from doing these forms of work. That work was a simple gestural interface, but the gesture is instinctive. It's a thing you most naturally want to do. The same with the bowls. Holding a bowl and handing a bowl to another person is a natural instinct, doesn't require explanation. Gesture for me in terms of this work, when we're working spatially in 360, is about that. Not the thing you're instructed to do, but the thing that your body wants to do. With this work, with people holding their hands up there, I started to notice that people did other things. They would often mirror the gesture of the woman in front of her. They would mirror the gesture or her facial expressions. And people fainted in front of this work. There was a sense that it was visceral, this encounter. So those learnings started to inform other work that I did. I decided I wanted to make a work where the viewer was the only person present in the work. And I made this piece, Duality of Light. In Evolution of Fearlessness, you saw Eva, who was in a gulag for 6 years. She told me when she was looking at herself in Evolution of Fearlessness that she could see her own sadness. And she talked about the unusual sense of that. She talked about sadness as a state that you feel, but that you can rarely see. Because even if we are looking at ourselves in a mirror, we hold our face in a particular way that is conscious. So this idea of an unconscious unmasking that could be offered by a work was of interest to me. And I made this very dark tunnel based on an architecture I'd experienced in Cambodia, a temple called Prayer Khan, where you could enter from 4 different directions, but it didn't matter the way you entered, through what portal. Everyone came to the same central place. And when you walk down this long tunnel on your own, you begin to perceive someone who arrives after you. Let me go back if I can. So you walk down and this person arrives after you. And just as you begin to perceive who they are, they begin to break up into points of light. The image was a live, delayed video of yourself. But interestingly, only about 25% of people did not recognise themselves at all. They could read the expression of that person, but they didn't necessarily see it to be them. Because in this work, there are abstractions on how we read faces. Colour is removed, sound is intensified. There's the way our brain reads and recognises, which can be placed inside of these works, that do that slippage so that it's harder for us to comprehend in the way we normally do. And then you get this kind of effect, where someone can look at an image of themselves and say, who was that woman? She doesn't look well. Or, as has also been said from someone who emerged from this work, is everyone so sad? This unmasked self of being in an interior space is a powerful thing to work with. And it's what people experience when they're in a VR headset. People talk about isolation in VR. I think intimacy is a better word. You're alone with that work, often just yourself, and everything is present to you. But you feel hidden from the rest of the world, and it's a powerful tool to use. in the creation of a work. Coral, which you can see down there, was a work that tipped that idea of the bowl and made it immense. And I was thinking then about what is it like to feel small in relation to something that generally we don't have that orientation to. Einstein said we feel naturally protective of something that we look down at, and we feel naturally awestruck by something when we have to raise our eyes. That physicality is embedded into us, just as natural gesture is. So I took coral and turned it into this overarching, immersive experience where you were small in relation to a coral reef at night. And for 45 minutes, you're lying on a seafloor with the life of a coral moving above you. And your sensation in relation to that alters your relationship to that environment. I'm not going to play you any more from Coral because you can just see it up there with John Maynard, the producer of it, who's here with the dome. But that work held some of the same thoughts that are important to me. It's immersive, your relationship is tipped from its natural form, and it was eminently able to be shared around the world. It opened in 25 cities around the world during 1 week. It didn't have a narrative that you had to listen to. It had a narrative that was purely visual, and you were driven by that audio to lose yourself in the work. But I made a companion piece then in 2011. This work was made, an augmented reality work that could go with Coral, because what I realised is that you can open people's hearts through sensation, but then you need to be able to give something else that you can carry away with you. The augmented reality work were just posters that you could download from the website of Coral Rekindling Venus. And they were just posters that looked like this from a research trip that I'd gone on with a scientist that I worked with for many years, Dr. Anya Salil. But, when you held the app that we developed with HitLab NZ up to the poster, you could see the coral descend back down into its natural environment. It was a very early AR work, but it gave a carry-away, a way to remain connected to that environment that you had just been with. And the app linked you to data from NOAA that was telling you where coral reefs around the world are currently getting too stressed, so that the app could connect you beyond the experience of the work through the poster that you could have in your room to current data that is telling you right now what's happening with coral reefs. Tender, the documentary, the feature documentary I made, I tried to employ some of those same techniques for immersion in feature form. Here's a scene
died
from it.
Of an ectopic pregnancy. She had an autopsy. And then I went and picked her up in the back of the car, not in a coffin, on this board, just like that. And then we're bringing her home to the house where she died. This is her husband. And this is her mother, who's come from Germany. And they've been trying to have a baby for 12 years. And the mother said, I said, you know, we can do all this. She said, I'm afraid. I said, if you trust me, I will get you there. So all the women came and the relatives. What I did with the mother was we took a corner of this each, the sheet, and I said, okay, when you're ready, let's pull it back together. So we didn't just do it all in one go, we just went step by step. And so this is, we're to here. So for me in this moment, you know, this is every parent's right to have time with their child. But I know that that is not always the case. And that picture for me is very powerful in that. And it was her only daughter, her only child, her only grandchild, all gone.
So in that piece, I wanted to show you this attempt to pull imagination into the work. Your imagination, mine, the imagination of the viewer. Sometimes we think we have to offer everything in a work, and by offering everything, every bit of information, every bit of sound, every part of a story, we remove the very thing that actually creates immersion, which is my capacity to put myself inside of that work. So what this piece does is hopefully do some of that, where you're pulled into it, precisely because you can't see the images they're looking at.
Firstly,
I might skip this clip and take you to, from those thoughts, how I began to work on what became Collisions. The year I finished Tender, I was invited by the Māori people in Western Australia to come and film them. I didn't know anything about the Māori people, and you may not know either. But their first contact was in the 1960s. They live in that Pilbara area in WA. And so fortunately for them, people were not wanting that land to grow or graze anything. So the Māori were left alone until the 1960s. The people who called me to go and work with them are therefore first contact people who wanted to both show their traditional practices in being in their land and also give some sense of what it feels like to be there. And I went to film them and create an installation. They wanted to demonstrate their hunting techniques. They're incredible hunters. And they wanted just to show what it's like to be in their place. On the very first night of this hunting trip, 10 days, sleeping out under the stars with 7 women. One of them, Nola, turned to me. I was talking about the desert in Maralinga in South Australia that I had been to in 2000. So we were under different stars, or same stars, different desert. Talking about deserts, I was talking about the flowers that I remembered from that South Australian desert. And Nola, who's Nyeri's wife, hearing that I had been into Maralinga, into Section 400, the prohibited zone that had been handed over to Britain in the 1950s, 1 million square kilometres of land, she turned to me and said, "Oh, you have to talk to Nyeri." She turned to me in a kind of, I can only say, sort of laser-like way, which was sort of like an instruction, and I understood that that conversation was going to happen. And a year later, I returned to the community, 2,000 kilometres northeast of Perth, to do a second work with the Māori. The women wanted to paint a very large painting of the area around Bangor, where the community is. And I just had a camera up and every 8 seconds took an image of this work, which was painted over a 10-day period. I'd come to understand what the Māori were trying to get me with my technology and tools to represent. This is maybe my early attempt at something like that, where you can see the painting on one side and satellite imagery of the same area that they're painting over the other. And during the making of this painting, Nyeri came into the room, the person I needed to talk to. He started giving instruction about the painting. And then he came to talk to me about what he'd seen in the 1950s. This is him in the 1960s. So 10 years before this, he said he was walking through a trade route in the South Australian desert when he saw an atomic test. And I asked him, what did you think that was? And his answer is the whole reason collisions exist. And if you've seen it, then you know. He said he thought it was the spirit of his gods rising up to speak with him. It occurred to me then that I had to create somehow virtually a meeting for these two men, Oppenheimer, who created that technology of the nuclear weapon, and Nyeri. And this was my earliest attempt at showing him what I could do. I thought I could make that spirit cloud appear as an installation, but I hadn't yet seen virtual reality. And when I did, I realised that was going to be the most powerful form where Nyeri could stand in his own community and tell you the story from his perspective. And you could stand where he stood in that very particular moment. So this is Nyeri testing VR for the first time. We'd worked out a storyboard. I'd gone and met with him in Newman, and then I travelled with two cameramen from Palo Alto, Liam Egan, sound recordist, various other people to the community. And the first thing we did, and I just want to tell you the process for doing this sort of work for me, the first thing we did was hold a community meeting so everyone could see the technology. The old people, then the young people, had a look at what VR was like. And from that point then, we could negotiate what it could show and what it couldn't show. The thing about VR, which is different to everything else, is that you can't frame anything off. Everything is exposed, therefore. Everything can be seen, but everything is exposed. Nyeri looked at the camera and said, oh, it's got 16 eyes. I said, it's got 16 eyes and it's got 4 ears, so you're going to have to help me work out what it can see and what it can't see, which was very important. And he and other Maru could do that, so that that camera, if the drone was flying too high, we would get the instruction that it had to go lower, because Nyeri could work out that what would be visible to the top camera would be something that should not be able to be seen. These navigations and negotiations meant that all along the way, this work would only show what it should show. You travel in through collisions the way I travel into that country. You're told why you're going. You're invited by me because Nyeri wants to meet you. And then you travel, just as I travel. So collisions follows the protocols of going into the community that apply to me when I go there. And that for me is important. It's around those ethics that Anna was talking about for this very particular potent form. Nyeri had, this is a greeting scene then, where he meets you.
Nola Taylor. And me, Curtis Taylor, standing by the gate. This is where I grew up.
Hello. Long way away.
Nyeri says, welcome. You have come from a long way away.
So those things were built into the experience of the work, not by accident, by design, so that you understood why you were there and who was meeting you. And then afterwards, the things that you see on the ground, the mosaic pattern burning, and the kangaroo scene, are all those things that was comfortable for Nyeri to show you. He was constantly asking me, where will the Europe people be? And I would say, wherever that camera is where they will be. So in collisions, what you can know is when he's addressing you, he knows who he's talking to.
Few people.
This is that scene I'd imagined of the meeting of the two old men.
Cried. Most people were silent.
I'm just going to skip through a bit so I can cover what comes next. The work then was done through that process, and Nyeri had a belief about his story, which he'd held inside of his community for a long time. He would regularly get up in his community meetings and say he was going to tell this story to the world, and in particular to politicians. Now you get a little bit of a sense of why it was that my arrival, having this connection to this story, was meaningful there. I had been invited by the World Economic Forum to create a work in virtual reality for that audience, to bring a VR work to Davos. So we got Neri, who has no birth certificate, a passport, and last January, he travelled with Nola and Curtis, his grandson, and when people watched collisions in that very particular closed tent of the World Economic Forum and heard him speaking to them, they emerged from that experience and he was standing in front of them. He could do the thing that he had imagined. He could share his story. But because the Maru do everything collectively, we also needed to push on the technology to deliver it communally. So we did synchronised screenings of collisions so that everyone could enter the work at the same time and leave it at the same time. So that collective thing that happens with cinema was not lost in this experience. And everyone emerged at exactly the same moment. The work then travelled because of its invitation at Davos and did the very thing that Neri had imagined it would do. He met people he didn't know and people he did. We did synchronised screenings in Sundance, and we continued to show the work in this synchronised form wherever we went for the year. And it was interesting that it made an impact in film festivals. But what was more interesting to me was the impact it made in small circles like this, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty meetings in Vienna. We were invited into closed rooms of 14 men who were discussing the nuclear safety of the world. That's Hans Blix watching collisions. So those men stopped their discussions and they watched this work. The privacy and intimacy that the form offers and its portability has proven to me to be very impactful. This is us showing the work to other nuclear test survivors. This is Karabekh. And then it started to get other invitations such as this, to the Trimby Forum of Disarmament. And now I'm going to move through these quickly and just show you, we have a Mandarin version of collisions now. We brought it home finally in October. And it did the thing really that Neri had hoped it would do. It was shown in Parliament House. Quickly after that, we were at the UN just before a vote for a resolution to ban nuclear weapons. It seemed to me there's a kind of power in the form when connected to powerful story. The portability of the technology, the intimacy offered by that technology, that allowed this work to move into circles I have never been able to bring another work into. Onward, we started getting invitations by other Indigenous remote communities to come and work with them. And that is where it's interesting for me onward. Because what these communities are asking is to use the technology in a way that is completely synchronous with their way of being. That it should act like a portal, that it should behave like a vision and carry you to another place and give you a message. It's a powerful technology, as yet we don't know where it can take us. But I'm interested in these connections about where it might be shifted to by others who practice different ways of being. In Mongolia, we're invited to come and do a work as well. And in Mongolia, I was asked a similar question to the one I was asked by the Madhu. What would you like to come and see? I had said to the Maru, I'm interested in animals. I said the same thing in Mongolia. So they took me to see their horses. These are the wild horses, the take, that have never been domesticated, that were extinct in the wild, that are extremely important to the Mongolians. And I looked at that horse and I thought, I recognise you. Your black mane standing in the air, your black legs, and that body. These are the cycles of the work we do. Artwork at different times, over different eras, but using different new technologies, but always to the purpose of the important story. Thank you.